Been asked to introduce Nick this evening. Wonderful Nick, brilliant science historian, and there's no one else like him, and he's going to give a great presentation on 9/11, I hope.
Okay, mate, thanks, yeah. So, best part of 20 years ago, there was a London 9/11 Truth Group started up. It was a terrifically exciting enterprise with the different theories and views. It's all kind of faded away now, hasn't it? I doubt if many people have got the memory of that past. For example, Shapiro Webster Tarpley, he came and gave us a memorable talk, two or three hours in London, about fabricated terror, Guy Fawkes, 9/11, the whole damn thing. Anyone here remember that at all?
Yeah.
No. Yeah. Okay, so it's this is the most extraordinary sight which the human race has ever seen. Okay, most astonishing spectacle the world has ever seen, and we're all impacted in a way by trauma. Okay, so the primary experience is a kind of trauma, something that seemed impossible, and yet it happened. And then, with an absurd immediacy, we were at once told who had done it, weren't we? So we were all, first of all, shocked, and then put into a condition of cognitive dissonance with the absurdity of the theory we were given. And then we noticed this new century seemed quite different from past history in the way these massive fabricated terror events were put on, like big Hollywood spectaculars, you know, not just the London bombing, but all sorts of spectacular fabricated terror events. I hope I'm speaking to an audience that is familiar with this concept. That's a central theme which our 9/11 Keep Talking group has grappled with over the years. The way in which this century, following on from 9/11, the great progenitor event, has fabricated terror events happening all the time. And the fabricated terror events, we dimly discern the horrible purpose. The horrible purpose is to get people ready for wars. And these wars are always against non-white people, aren't they? Middle Eastern non-white people, horrible wars, and concepts of terrorism. Why have we got to bomb this nation, that nation? And in fact, one of the main perpetrators, Donald Rumsfeld, in Secretary of State for Defence, when 9/11 happened, out of his office a few weeks later came the list of 7 nations that had to be destroyed. And where did that come from, you know? And then people didn't believe it at first, and then one by one we've gone through those nations. And Syria was resisted, thanks to Russia, it was not destroyed, and the last one on the list is Iran. So an amazing list of 7 nations came after that event. Well, you know, where did that come from? So we're shocked into this condition, and we notice that not a single politician in this country speaks words of truth about it. We did have one, David Meacher, didn't we, who was very guardedly say that he thought the logic was wrong here and it was inappropriate for Britain to support the US war on terror. And some people feel he died off rather quickly after saying that. Basically, you get a few wonderful wise people after they've retired, like Cynthia McKinney in America, who will tell us about what happened. But
no, she spoke before she retired. She's a very close friend of mine. She spoke immediately.
She spoke immediately, right, thank you.
And she didn't get done over for another couple of years.
Right, thank you for correcting me, yeah. Brave Cynthia McKinney, the heroic Cynthia McKinney, spoke out right away. And
as did Ed Asner.
As did?
Ed Asner.
Oh, did he? Yeah. Could you tell us about Ed Asner?
Well, he's a famous Hollywood actor, and he was a very close friend of mine. He died a month ago.
Right.
To the day.
Right.
And he, from day one, he narrated all the videos. And,
right.
They both were my 2 closest friends, really. And
oh, right. Oh, thank you very much, yeah.
I took some years to be persuaded, but they were there on day one.
Yeah. Okay.
For a fact.
Okay. So we've had no politician in this country who will speak, or say in Europe, who will speak words of truth about it. And this is very enigmatic and disturbing for us, that this vast event, which changes the world we live in so profoundly, there's an absence of discussion about it. That's what our group was trying to do. And of course we get slammed as conspiracy theorists. Our 9/11 group for 10 years in London would basically say 9/11 was an inside job, which is kind of mantra, which just went on. And some of us used to love going into all the details of what happened, Flight 93, where did it go, were there real passengers in it, what happened to the passengers, all these fascinating little details. Well, other people would say, no, don't do that. We want to get media credibility, we want to keep the message simple, we want to just demand a public inquiry. Well, that was never going to happen, was it? There never would be a public inquiry. So our group was very divided over what we should be looking at, but I think we made a good show of having what I experienced, a whole lot of experts together. I mean, I pulled together this book, Who Did 9/11, very much from hearing all these wonderful experts talking about 9/11 and all the details, and it's a kind of shame that it just faded out. But 20 years later now, let's try to get a bit of a focus on what happened. On who did it. That's a far more difficult question. That is quite frightening, because whoever did it, it's what we call the hidden hand. There's a hidden hand at work in this 21st century which is able to make things happen. But after all the cataclysm of 9/11 in America, nobody was prosecuted. Nobody lost their job. A whole lot of people who looked like key perpetrators got promoted. Oh yeah, they got promoted. Nobody even gets prosecuted. And that's rather like the London bombings, if you notice. Did they ever manage to prosecute anyone of the London bombings? No, they blamed some dead people, conveniently dead people, which is a common ploy, but nobody got prosecuted in London bombings, just as nobody did for 9/11.
There was no criminal investigation, in fact, was there? There wasn't a criminal investigation.
No, I don't think so. There was.
There wasn't.
In England, there were hearings. A lot of people heard stuff about London bombings, but there was no evaluation about it or investigation, as I said, in a criminal sense. No. And the Truth Movement kept requesting and demanding a criminal investigation. For example, would Bush and Cheney be made to testify, which everybody should have been, and that just didn't happen, did it? So it's obviously something to do with the core power elite in America that made the whole thing happen. So the official story is severely damaging to anyone's cognitive faculties. The idea that somebody in a cave in Afghanistan with a laptop, an old man fairly dying of kidney failure on dialysis, could make the thing happen. But that is a story, and it was put out pretty well at 10 o'clock that morning. Okay? Bin Laden, Osama bin Laden. So this is obviously some programming when everyone was in a state of catatonic deep shock, just trying to figure out this thing. You're given the programming, Osama bin Laden. And with the London bombings, a comparison, Tony Blair told us, I think it was the same evening he told us, we know that this is Islamic crime, words to that effect. So you get the programming very early on while you're in a state of shock. That's crucial to the way it works. I think it's important for us lot to affirm that, if I may quote the intrepid Christopher Bolin, I much recommend this short, easy to read little book, The War on Terror. There's nothing marginal nor radical about 9/11 truth. It is in fact the most important political issue of our time. Now a lot of people don't realise that. Stop the War group never ever understands what this is, why they should look at it, and never get the connection. Okay, so let me read out the next sentence. It said, "It's a common sense peace movement comprised of patriotic and responsible Americans who demand truth and justice and refuse to accept their nation being hijacked into criminal and costly wars of aggression waged on behalf of a foreign power." Now that is very much making a big step about who did it, but he's linking the criminal wars of aggression with the 9/11 event, and it's so important for us to understand that. that the Stop the War movement needs to comprehend it's not enough just to march in the street and make the negative statement, stop the war. You've got to get to the illusory phantom menace that is set up. The phantom menace is in a way a major purpose of the whole 9/11 event, to conjure up that fictional enemy that doesn't really exist. Okay, some of you might want to watch the old Star Wars movies, the Phantom Menace, which is actually about this theme. It's terribly important for us all. Have we got an enemy? Who is the enemy? And don't believe what the state says about the designated enemy, just as George Orwell warned us. There's suddenly you get a whole lot of 19 Islamic hijackers the FBI puts up. That was, I think, the day after, wasn't it? Suddenly 19 hijackers. So you're suddenly given an Islamic image of terror. And it's mind-numbingly absurd. What do they have? Oh, box cutters. Get onto the airplane with box cutters. That's because the people at the airport didn't want to get in trouble for allowing people in with guns or knives onto the plane. That would have got the airport people into trouble, you see. So, they got with box cutters, yeah. Then 7 or 8 of them pipes up from Islamic. They were still alive. So it was identity theft. It was complicated identity theft. And you can easily spend months going into this kind of blurred identity theft of, look at these people, stolen passports, all this sort of thing. And let's not do that now. We're trying to answer what is in a way more difficult and frightening question: who was responsible for doing this? But to understand the way the Islamic world is immediately demonized is a pretty important part of it. Okay, so as I say, we start off with this mind-numbing absurdity, and we've got various people who are helping us to find the answer here. I've quoted Christopher Bolin and Sarovsky in the middle, a top American. He teaches the military academy. Alan Sabrowski, and we'll be quoting him later on. And of course, David Icke, coming out with a second book on the subject, second one, right? And I do recommend this actually. You don't read it all, but you just open it anywhere, and I think you'll find it's fairly gripping. This does describe the world we live in, and it's got a remarkable memory of all the stuff happened on 9/11. So I'll come on to what David's got to say about it. So these people have generally been persecuted in the sense that, well, I don't exaggerate, but Icke gets his meetings cancelled. Bolin gets beaten up by the FBI and has to leave America, separated from his family. I think he's got back again now. And Sabrowski is all his stuff is deleted and very strongly censored.
Where's he from in the world?
He's an American teacher of military. Yeah. Okay. Now, where do we start this story? One place to start is early prophecies that the thing would happen, we get these remarkable Israeli sources warning that a thing was going to happen. The spy master of Israeli intelligence, Issa Harel, he meets somebody called Mike Evans, who's a rabid Christian Zionist, and he asks, Evans asks Harel about Arab terrorism, would it come to America? And Issa Harel says, Arab terrorists would likely strike the tallest building in New York City. So that is a prediction, and we get another much stronger prediction from Benjamin Netanyahu in a book. He writes a book. He very much pioneers the idea of the war on terror. It's important to appreciate. We all heard about the war on terror after 9/11, right? Suddenly Bush was talking about it. But Israel very much pioneered it. It's a way of casting basically Muslims as being the bad guys, as if they are the problem, and we need to fight wars to defeat terrorism, which again is an incredibly absurd notion. The idea that you can fight terror is I mean, what a paranoid concept. I mean, American drone missiles, those are the terror, you know. There's no terror worse than having those drone strikes coming over you. And but so this was pioneered in Israel, the idea of how to fight terrorism, and that the Western world, including Israel, would join together to fight terror. And this was a core meaning and purpose of the 9/11 events. And it's important to appreciate that it was blueprinted in the, I think it's 1980s, by Netanyahu.
You can't fight a noun. As Gore Vidal says,
Sorry?
it's like you can't fight a noun. I mean, Gore Vidal says it's like saying you get a war on dandruff or something.
You can't fight a noun, thank you. That's a good way of putting it, yes. Yes. Do chip in if anyone wants to comment by the way. Now, this is in his book, A Nuclear Bomb in the Basement of the World Trade Center. Well, we've had a speaker here, what's his name? German fella? Heinz Pommer, yeah, claiming that's precisely what happened. And that's quite a credible theory about what brought the towers down. And that prediction, that foreknowledge, we might compare with what happened on the London bombings when Netanyahu just happened to be in London at the time and just happened to be staying in a hotel right next to where the bomb went off, together with his buddy Rudy Giuliani. They can get the thrill of feeling the bomb going off, you know. And there, he was warned 6 minutes before it happened. So he likes being centre of attention, and that got him a world centre of attention, that he had been warned 6 minutes before it happened. And people said, well, oh, Mossad rang you up, did they? And he said, oh no, it's Scotland Yard. Well, that's very absurd, isn't it?
I'm not so sure.
Well, how does Scotland Yard know about it? Oh, okay, well, why would they only have phoned him up about it? No one else got this forewarning. That's the point. So that is foreknowledge. I think, as we'll see, Mossad did display foreknowledge of the 9/11 event, and Mossad does like to show how good it is by predicting these events, but it doesn't want to predict them so well that it looks as if they might have done it. See what I mean? So that was his prediction, and what actually happened. A lot of people think that looks like a nuke going off, you know, and Heinz Pommer gave us this theory. I mean, I don't know, search me, I don't know what brought the towers down, but this is quite a good theory, and it's quite well respected, a nuke in the basement.
In the sub-basement, yeah. Because there was a chap called Felipe somebody from Puerto Rico, who they got up from there, and he had skin falling.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
His body.
Right, so just people testify that William Rodriguez, who used to come and speak to our old group, and stay at Blinder's house, and he testified there was explosions going on in the sub-basement. So this is all looking like, you know, Netanyahu knew pretty damn well what was going to happen. Now, there were two different places where people were found glad and rejoicing on the day, and I think this could be an important clue. Netanyahu was saying on the evening of 9/11, he quoted to an American newspaper, "It's very good." Well, not very good, but it will generate immediate sympathy. New York Times, okay, which is kind of astonishing to say. And he reiterated that years later, in 2008. We are benefiting from one thing, and that is the attack on the Twin Towers and the Pentagon. And what he meant by that was that America accepted the whole story of the war on terror. That was good for Israel, because America was now fighting the enemies of Israel. That's what he meant by it's very good. Okay? And so a sense of Israel benefited from, then Haaretz put a cartoon. You can see Netanyahu flying a plane, Israel, into the towers. And so a lot of people weren't very amused by this cartoon. But there you go. It's in an Israeli newspaper it's something that Israel might have been planning.
Was that published before 9/11 or after?
This is 2008. Sorry, 2014. That cartoon. Right. Okay, now, who were the other people who were found to be rejoicing this is a terribly important clue. Who did it? Was referred to as the 5 dancing Israelis. There were loads and loads of Israeli spies around America who were arrested in months leading up to 9/11, all over the place, pretending to be art students and going all sorts of strategic positions. And various vans with Israeli people with explosives and so on were found driving around New York City on the day, as if planning various other things that the police might have intercepted successfully, as we'll see. But the most dramatic of these 5 Israelis, okay. On the day, George Freeman, a well-known intelligence analyst, he wrote a newspaper on the same day. The big winner today, intended or not, is the state of Israel. There is no question that the Israeli leadership is feeling relief. So all the rest of the world was expressing horror and shock, and in Israel there's this sense of relief. Okay? Now it's quite important to understand that. These dancing Israelis were setting up there on the other side of the Hudson River. They were up on some sort of, they had a van and they were on a rooftop. And the key thing is they set up the cameras before the towers were struck. That's the all-important thing. It wasn't that they saw it happening and said, wow, let's get a look at this. The witness described how they set up their cameras before the towers were struck. Quote, they seemed to be taking a movie. They were like happy, you know. They didn't look shocked to me. I thought it was strange. And this New Jersey resident gave the car number plate to the police, whereby they could catch these people. Yes?
Can I tell you something? I've got a friend here in London who is English, but one of her parents is Israeli, and she's got a lot of friends there. And she knows one of the 5.
All right.
And she says, I don't think she'd ever repeat this, but she says, yeah, they were there, it was them, and they did dance, and they were happy because...
There's a lot of Muslims celebrating as well on the day as well.
Yeah, but that's a different thing. That's a very different thing.
No,
it's a very, very different thing to having actual link to one of those 5.
Yeah.
And knowing that...
Can we just reply to this? Initially, there were videos put out of Muslims rejoicing. Yeah. Initially, that was put out on TV. And then that was shown that it wasn't for this event at all.
It was fake old film.
A fake old film, yeah. Sorry? Sorry?
If one walked down the Empire Road and then see them celebrating.
Oh, okay.
Right. I still remember seeing boys going around on scooters with bandanas shouting Ali Akbar, but they had nothing to do with it.
Okay, sorry, didn't interrupt. Did you say we had?
Yeah, no, I just think it's, you know, when I heard her say that, I just thought, gosh, that is interesting. She had no axe to grind in any way.
So one of these actually was photographed flicking open a cigarette lighter with the burning towers in the background. You know, can you believe it? The extraordinary question for us is, why are we not allowed to see these pictures? They've been released, sort of released, and they're so heavily redacted, there's hardly anything you can see. Well, why is that? This is the most obvious clue to people who knew it was going to happen, who were, I mean, they were taken to Israel and went on Israeli TV, and they said, we were there to record the event. Apparently you could say that on Israeli TV, you know. We may ask why they sent back to Israel. They were put in jail. Of course they were put in jail. Why were they let out? They were given lie detector tests and failed them. It was a company, a moving furniture moving company they were part of. It was a front organisation, furniture moving, that quickly scuttled off and went back to Israel. They were found to be part of that. Michael Chertoff, a very senior position in America then, his influence got them released. I think it was his influence, and got them sent back home. And this brings us to a core problem, or a key factor in the perpetration event, a dual citizen. A whole lot of top people in America, especially the neocons, what I call the neocon movement, were dual citizens, Israeli-American. And that means their loyalty is primarily to Israel. And Michael Chodor's mother was one of the first Mossad agents. So how is it possible that a fellow like that is in such a senior position? This is, I mean, if there's a moral to the 9/11 event, it's that dual citizens should not be allowed to hold any position of power or influence, because it undermines the state. Okay, so those 5, yeah, that was one of the key pieces of evidence, and some of those were definitely Mossad agents, and so you know, there were lots of vans driving around, some with explosives in, and there was the classic remark one of them made when the police stopped the van. They said, "We're not your problem, we're Israelis. Palestinians are your problem, they're your problem, don't have to worry about us, we're Israelis." Which is sort of hypnotic mantra they'd obviously been given. But, yeah, that it seemed to work quite well, and a lot of the police reports talked about people of Middle Eastern origin, so say in these vans, right? Now, this is what's called chutzpah. These vans are actually painted with the event in question, a plane flying into the Twin Towers. And you may not find this hard to believe, but there's authentic police dialogue reports of arresting the van with this painted on the side. Some people try to make out it's fake, but there's authentic police reports on the day, and there's a whole story of Israelis with explosives, and various other bridges of New York they seem to have been planning to blow up, and the police closed the exit, quickly closed the exit roads and arrested quite a lot of them. So yeah, I'm not really going to go into that, but this is, I think this is a very key. It's people sort of brazen, really, just knowing they can get away with it. Okay. Now, if you ask what is the evidence for who did it, I think the best single bit of evidence is that Lucky Larry here, Silverstein, he's a billionaire and possibly the most distinguished single benefactor of Israel in terms of raising funds that go to Israel. He was chairman of the United Jewish Appeal, and he would ring up Benjamin Netanyahu every week, have a chat with him, okay, and so he's massively raising funds for Israel in the USA, and he came to own this whole complex only 2 months before the event. So this is 7 buildings. We've got a map here. You can see the 7 buildings. Okay. Now, all 7 of the buildings owned by Larry Silverstein were pulverized on that day, and everything else not owned by Larry Silverstein mysteriously remained upright. Okay. So I think that is in a way the biggest clue to who did it. You know.
Strangely enough, he wasn't in the building.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. Strangely enough, his normal breakfast at the top of the first tower, World Trade Center 1. He cancelled it. Was it some?
Premonition.
No, dentist appointment or something. You know.
His co-lessor of the World Trade Center was Frank Lowy.
Lowy, yeah.
Used to own the Westfield Shopping Centre.
Right.
Stratford,
right.
Who we hardly hear anything about.
No, we don't. Right? These would have been. Yeah, these would have been totally involved. But Larry, in the most absolutely brazen manner. I mean, what did he do that afternoon? Chaos was all around, apart from his eternally famous comment about pull it, about, World Trade Center 7. He was asked about it. He said the best thing to do is just pull it, before it came down. Apart from that, he rings up the insurance company, he rings up his lawyer and says he's going to claim twice for his insurance because 2 planes struck the towers. Okay? So he does that on the day of 9/11. to try and, I think each claim was about 3 billion, wasn't it?
He never even bought the lease. He only put a small amount down, I think $10 million or something, on the lease.
Did he?
Didn't pay for it.
Well, he insured them just 6 weeks before, and get this, he took out the insurance with European insurance companies. That's why the New York courts were so keen to support him, because the money came from Europe for rebuilding. So all the billions for the gleaming new centre you see now, that came from European insurance firms. Now, I'll just throw this in. There's one fellow who joined one of these, became a stakeholder in this European insurance company. John Paul Leonard is the Progressive Press, who does a very good American publisher, my publisher, and he became a stakeholder so that he could chip in at one of their meetings and say, look, you mustn't pay this up, because he said pull it. It was obviously part of this plan to bring the towers down. So on that grounds, you mustn't pay up this insurance money.
Pull it's an expression used in the demolition trade, isn't it?
Yeah. It means to but you can only do it if you spent weeks wiring the place up for demolition beforehand. You can only pull it. You can't just do it on the day. Okay, so this is a specific destruction of buildings owned by Larry Silverstein, and very obviously, I don't need to tell you lot, the 2 planes allegedly impacted only the towers and not Building 7. I mean, if you can believe it, the official report on 9/11 did not mention that Building 7 had collapsed, so-called Keane report. Just didn't mention it. The 2 towers came down, and you're meant to believe that it was the impact of the planes that brought them down.
All 7 buildings of the World Trade Center were destroyed.
Correct. Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, that's so important, what the gentleman just said. All 7 buildings were pulverised on that day. And we want to get this message out. That is what happened. It wasn't just 2 towers collapsed. Mysteriously, all these 7 buildings owned by Larry Silverstein were pulverised and had to be removed and rebuilt. Yes?
So another theory I heard is that there was illegal trading going on as well, and it was to destroy the any evidence.
Oh God, yeah. I'm not really confident on this, but Building 7, the whole Enron scandal, wasn't it? The whole Enron scandal, and all the documents were in some floor of Building 7.
And the missing 2.9 trillion.
Yeah, that trillion. That was in.
That was being investigated within, wasn't it?
That was in the Pentagon, just the exact spot. It was being investigated, the exact spot that the plane hit. Right. Here's what Christopher Bollin said about attempts to solve the 9/11 event, where people tried to investigate. Christopher Bollin did a lot of investigating. He'd be all around the place asking people what they knew of what really happened. He said at every critical point where the events and circumstances of 9/11 should have been investigated and discussed, there has been a Zionist, a dedicated devotee of the State of Israel, occupying a key position and acting as the controller and censor of evidence, the gatekeeper of information. That was his conclusion, which helps us to understand why there's been no criminal trial or prosecution at all. So this is a very extraordinary situation that America's in by its closeness with Israel. You know, you've got 50 million Christians, evangelical Christians, who kind of adore Israel and see it as a marriage made in heaven between America and Israel. And it's this terrific closeness between the two, which has almost never happened between 2 countries. There's almost no other analogy, is there?
Nick,
sorry, it's quick, just back here.
Thanks, Nick. Sorry, darling. Also, I don't know if anybody's watched or listened to Sheep Farm recently, but Sheep Farm with Chris and Don, they actually said that Klaus Schwab, because their latest is about the darling Mr. Schwab, and they say that Klaus Schwab and Rumsfeld were having a cup of coffee at a cafe nearby on the day, so they were watching the whole thing.
No, really?
Yes.
Yes.
He was in Manhattan and he was having a cup of coffee with Rumsfeld, almost as though they were watching the whole drama.
Fantastic, yeah.
So not just the Israelis, but obviously very high up with Schwab and Rumsfeld, they knew exactly what was happening.
Yeah, thank you very much. As you pointed out, a whole lot of absolute key people were not Israelis or Jews, like Rumsfeld, Cheney, Myers, the Bush family, who were totally involved. And it's as if there was some American faction or contingent that wanted it to happen. Okay, now this is again an absolute sort of dead giveaway. This the Prime Minister Ehud Barak happens to be in London in the BBC World Service at 11 o'clock, which is about an hour after it happened. And what does he say? Well, he twice mentions Osama bin Laden, so that is the mantra that the world has to accept. And he runs off a list of the nations that are going to get bombed, which he calls rogue nations. So this is the major Israeli concept of the enemy nations, which America now has to accept because they are terrorists. So the mantra of sort of mind-numbing kind of stupidity that is put through to people is terrorists did this event, Middle East terror and its terrorists, start the war on terror, and Osama bin Laden did it. So this kind of mantra, he repeats that, and he even quotes the number who have died in the air crashes. I mean, for God's sake, 156 people, you see that? American Airlines, 156 people on board, and that is pretty close to the official number. Now, how would they know that just an hour after the event? How would they even know which planes had crashed? Or how would the BBC know it? So this is the kind of a shock doctrine of giving people information while they're in a state of shock. And Christopher Bolin has really brought this out, that the way this is given to people on both sides of the Atlantic on the very morning. This is what you've got to believe. Okay, it's nothing to do with any investigation. It's a pre-prepared script. Okay. Right. I want to look at the development of the philosophy of looking at who did it. In Icke's first book, Alice in Wonderland, World Trade Center Disaster, he was basically looking at the idea of an inside job and the idea of pathological criminals. What is the pathological mind like? Which and looking at how the official story couldn't be true. And in this story, he much more goes into Israeli-Jewish involvement in the planning of the event and the particular sect, he calls it Sabbatean Frankist, who he reckons are involved in creating these kind of events that cause turmoil and disruption. So this is it's a very intense study, and he hasn't got banned by Amazon like my book. I don't know what Amazon banned my book. So I'm recommending this. Any of you guys like the Icke stuff? It's his best book since Children of the Matrix, and it's if you want to be reminded of all the details, but a lot of other stuff in our modern world he goes through as well. He's quite angry at having various venues of his banned, right, by the CIA, Command Against Anti-Semitism. So let's read what he says. The evidence that reveals without question the foundational involvement of the attacks, that's attacks on 9/11, of the ultra-Zionist and death cult cabal that controls the state of Israel and operates worldwide. The ultra-Zionist agents of regime change triggered by 9/11, has turned the American taxpayer into a cash cow to fund wars in the Middle East for the benefit of Israel's territorial and acquisitive ambitions, while so many Americans sleep in the streets. So I want to try and argue that this is one side of the story. Israel did it. Israel did do it. Major elements of planning a long time ahead, probably before anyone else. Or maybe a sense that it was going to happen. But it also was generated and gestated within America. It's very strange. There's two independent centres. And so I come on to the great 9/11 philosopher Webster Tarpley, and he adamantly, I recommend this book, right? This was in our old 9/11 group. This was one of the classic books we recommended. 9/11 Synthetic Terror, Made in the USA. And he looks at all the terror drills that were going on, for example, over the event. There were more drills and war games going on over the event, basically, than any other time in American history. So if you just plotted the terror events, you'd get a peak on terror drills and war games. You'd get a peak on that 9/11 event. So the basic, modus operandi of fabricated terror is you have a war game that needs only a few people to make it transition into the real thing. So a whole lot of people are looking on their radar screens thinking this is a drill or a war game, and then it goes live. And so that is the transition, and his book is very much about that.
Did that happen with the 7/7 bombing as well?
Well, absolutely, yeah. There was Peter Powers drills going on at the same stations at the same time.
And it's not like there are drills that happen every day of the year, all year, every year. It's just this weird coincidence.
They might do that sort of thing once a year, but
he used the term new normal back in 2006, I think.
New normal, right.
Referring to post-terror events of the 7th of July.
UK Column, I don't know, 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, flagged up that there were advertisements for agencies to supply crisis actors for a new role play for a big terrorist crisis.
Right.
So they were saying, well, watch out then. So
Yeah.
a similar thing.
Yeah.
So this play out.
Crisis actors is very much a phenomenon of this 21st century, aren't they? We didn't really hear about them before, for all the excitement and drama of pretend events. The idea that you have to rehearse for the terror that will happen and prepare for it. And we're getting that ad nauseam.
Like the virus.
Like the virus. Well, we could say that, yeah. Exactly. It was exactly that, yeah, damn right. Event 201, September before. Bill Gates was involved in it all, and then they were just practicing, of course, just practice.
I think the people with the crisis actors, like it's was it act like you've got it was the slogan, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Act like you've got it.
Act like you've got it. Right. Well, Ollie Demagon's very, very good on this. He talks about the these Illuminati playing cards. Have you seen these? Here's one. It was allegedly published in 1982. I don't know if this was in the original copy, but can you see the difference? Which one looks more real to you? The actual event on the right. Some people think it's all film and video, but my impression is that did really happen on the right. And on the left, that is the Illuminati playing card. Okay, so we're looking at Webster Tarpley's thesis now that the event was dreamed up and imagined within America. That why would America want an event like this to happen? Why would its fantasies and dreams and comic books and films show this kind of thing happening? Well, it's to do with, I would say, America at the end of the century, it was in a crisis. It had 800 military bases all around the world, right? And it had no enemy. The enemy disappeared in 1991 when the Iron Curtain, when communism collapsed. Soviet Union collapsed. So it had an enormous crisis for a whole decade of no enemy. You know, shucks, what are we spending $500 billion a year on the military without having an enemy? So this couldn't go on. I think our culture, Britain and America, had this in common, that they can't really exist without having an enemy. Britain through the centuries always needed to have an enemy.
The king has to have an enemy.
Well, you always got to be fighting someone. You can't just live happily in the land. And so America needed a story. Now the old story was the war on communism. What were all the military bases doing? Oh, well, they're compelling people to use the dollar and compelling countries to sell us all their raw materials so that 4% of the population can consume about 40 or 50% of the world's resources. You can't say that is the reason for all the American military bases all around the world. Okay, you have to have a story, and the story was the war on communism, the war against the Reds. Now that had gone, and it needed a new story. So I would say that America, point of view of people designing 9/11 events, it needed the 9/11 event as a new narrative, and this amazingly absurd concept of war and terror did fit the bill. That became the explanation of what all the military bases were doing around the world, and the projection of American force. And it got even better. Donald Rumsfeld was especially keen on this. In the afternoon of 9/11, he gave a press meeting. He said, well, look how terrible, we've been attacked. Don't you realise we need more spending on our military and defence now to prevent this happening again? And he was especially keen on the Space Force. Okay? America had dominance of land, sea and air, and the new century was going to have dominance in space as well. So and they call it full spectrum dominance. This was the terrifically exciting concept that Donald Rumsfeld could launch after 9/11. 9/11 was, as it were, a small price to pay, having this terrifically exciting event, dominance in land, sea, air and space. And they would become masters of the universe. They would become, because the old Soviet Union was gone, America would become get global domination. This was the terrific, horrific dream that the neocons built up in various documents that America was to aim for, and why the military should be built up and not run down. No, they didn't want peace, they wanted war. In fact, they wanted perpetual war, and 9/11 was the perfect excuse for perpetual war. Now, some people think since the 1970s, there's the Iron Mountain, report from the Iron Mountain, isn't there, that war is the strength of the state, this horrendous doctrine.
War is the health of the state.
War is the health of the state, yeah. It's a horrific doctrine that America more or less was succumbing to after the dark powers took over with the assassination of Kennedy. So 9/11 can be seen within that context, I'm suggesting. Okay, now you always have to have stories to be told to hold America together, okay? It needs stories. And here is Bin Laden playing an essential role as the bad guy. These are his, in June, counter-terrorism scenario, joint training for unconventional threat.
Such a nice face, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Never got a bad guy, does it?
Well, he's a wonderfully intelligent character with very wise moral judgments that I don't quote them here, but I think very remarkable moral perspective and judgment on things. And by the way, he put out several statements saying he hadn't done it immediately after the event. So Pakistani newspapers, and then his death was a funeral was held 14th of December of 2001, and his will appeared. He's got a will, so it's quite clear he did die then, and in one of the Tora Bora mountains. So here he's being used, and it's being used. Global Gardening, Vigilant Garden, September the 10th to 12th. Now that's an amazing synchrony with his face on it. So continuity training. Now that has a very specific meaning, continuity of government. Rumsfeld and Cheney have been practicing for that for years and had millions, if not billions of dollars preparing for that. CRG was a big American concept for what happened if America was attacked and decapitated, so it lost its president, then power would continue with the military, various underground military bases would continue the government of America, okay? That's what it was intended for. And Dick Cheney, in the bunker of the White House, about 10 o'clock in the morning of 9/11, he activated that continuity of government. That's one of the most important things that happened on that day. So in a way, power left the presidency then, which is why he wanted George Bush to stay out of the way, and went over to the military. So that is what is meant by continuity training, yeah. Joint unconventional threat. Well, that might mean some people think that means exotic technology that America had got and might have been used on 9/11. So you can see from this why Webster Tarpley reached the conclusion that it was an event designed in America. That this is American fantasy and dreaming, and obviously bin Laden was going to be blamed because he was in the territory. They'd done all the war games for bin Laden as the official bad guy. Right. Now, to what extent were these guys responsible? A lot of people think that there's some sort of nucleus. Dick Cheney was in command, total command of operations on that morning in America, and these are not Jewish or Israeli. So if you want to say, Israel did it, you've got a problem here. A whole lot of people, a centre that is a kind of centre that is that they are not as such Israeli, but neocons are very, very close to close loyalty. So people like Rudy Giuliani, Jeb Bush, key perpetrators, and I would tend to say they got their orders and they knew what was going to happen, and they reckon they were benefiting from it. I wouldn't see them as the actual originators. And Ron Unz, now I don't know how many of you reached unz.com. Recommend that. It's a top intellectual website. Ron Unz is an American conservative who stood as a candidate in California, so he can't be dismissed as some sort of loony lefty or whatever. Very sensible, balanced views he comes out with. And an article of his said how it's just not credible, given the careers of Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld, that they wanted to bring down the towers and arranged all that destruction. That they would have been used to some sort of criminal underworld or whatever going on, or maybe that they had to take orders, just as we saw how the 7 nations to be destroyed came directly out of Rumsfeld's office, apparently, as far as we know.
Bush was the mastermind, sure.
I mean, that's such a joke, isn't it? Bush, he experienced the event as some sort of transcendental event. So the mantra that we always had, 9/11 was an inside job, means you give the blame to these people. And I'm not quite sure they deserve that amount of blame. I mean, they should be obviously tried, but all the stuff we dream of won't ever happen, will it? They're obviously complicit, or fairly obviously complicit. But most people think that Webster Tarpley is fundamentally mistaken in giving this amount of responsibility to this group. Okay, now if anyone here thinks that Muslims did it, I don't expect that there are, but this is the crucial bit of evidence demonstrating that it could not have been any Muslim or something like that or whatever. Between 10 and 10:30 in the morning, threat messages were received, apparently by Dick Cheney, which he relayed on to George Bush, who was flying in Air Force One. And it said, Air Force One is next. And then there seems to be another one saying Angel was next. Now there was a code name every day for Air Force One, only known to the security forces, that was changed. And Angel was the code name on that day, right? So this told them that somebody at the highest security levels, American military, was making a threat and might possibly have nuclear codes or whatever. So whoever you think did it, it seems that the president was being threatened at this point. He was taken off from Florida, that elementary school. He was flying around, and he was still in the air when he got this phone call from Dick Cheney. And here's what Webster Tarpley said about this event. The sponsors showed their hand. They were not located in a cave in Afghanistan, but were rather a network located high within the US government and military. So that is the inference which he believes is very key revelation about the perpetrators. This was reported in official newspapers, I think the Washington Post, and then it just got airbrushed out of the story as the story of Bin Laden took over, right? But it's definitely it's a definite part of the story on that morning that Bush got that threat in a code alluding to the plane he was flying in. So, right. Here we have what I've already discussed, this continuity of government concept that Dick Cheney was hustled, went down to the White House bunker quite early on, much earlier than he later tried to claim that he didn't go down there until the the impacts had taken place. But here is Mike Ruppert, a wise old bird, passed away a few years ago. I hope some of you remember Mike Ruppert.
Yeah, I knew him.
You knew him? Oh, right.
He worked very closely with Cynthia.
Oh, right, did he? Yes, would you like to tell us about him?
Well, no, I mean, just that he was fantastic, and I don't think he died in the way they said he did, and he did a lot of work on drugs in Los Angeles.
Yeah, he showed the way the CIA was involved in drug smuggling into America, didn't he?
Yeah, and I mean, he and Cynthia were working very closely together, and quite a few people in their sort of circle over a few years died mysterious deaths.
Well, it does happen, yeah, right. Yeah. So he was a
accidents, or people were told that they'd kill themselves.
So he was
he'd left a note saying, "I will never kill myself. If ever you're told that, I have not killed myself."
He was wasn't a detective police officer?
Policeman,
yeah. He was the one who came to understand how the CIA was massively ferrying drugs around to get this invisible liquid assets to fund their operations.
And also to do damage to the black community in America in particular. Also to do damage to the black communities in America in particular. Yeah.
Aha. Oh, okay. Anyway, his book, Crossing the Rubicon, he predicted this big peak oil, which never happened. So that has undermined his book somewhat, but it's still a very great account of the 9/11 mystery. He said, talked about how Richard Cheney was in full and complete control of a properly functioning parallel command and communication system. Okay, so that's exactly what we mean by continuity of government. What was he doing in the bunker? Well, first of all, there were a lot of drills going on. So he could have just been wanting to monitor all the drills that were going on and trying to find which were real and which were drills. And secondly, the continuity of government, the relocating of power to secret underground, mountain bases. And the question is, was he doing something else? And there was a famous testimony. Somebody gave testimony to the 9/11 Commission about somebody kept asking about the plane coming in. Remember that one? It's 50 miles away. Do we let it come? Do the orders still stand? And Cheney went around, yes, of course they still stand. Have you heard anything else? That is quite impossible that a plane can approach the Pentagon unless it's an American plane and got permission to come, because there'd be automatic batteries of missiles would fire off from the Pentagon. Any plane trying to do that. So that shows that there were some sort of orders he'd been given. Okay, and I've also pointed out he was closely connected with JINSA, the Jewish Institute for National Security, the most important organisation in terms of influence. Right. And he made a comment about going over to the dark side, didn't he? He was very furtive and hidden, and there were never records kept of what his aides had done. And then he made a comment about we have to work with the dark side, if you will. So there were various portraits of him as Darth Vader. Dark side indeed. Okay, now I've mentioned the 800 military bases all around the world. This is the terrific dream, which may be still in force. I don't know whether it's still in force, but this is the vision of the US military. For example, you see the whole of Russia is described as US-EU com, right? So the whole area of globe of the earth is divided up into these zones of the American military. And so I'm saying that the dream of full spectrum dominance was to achieve this. And if you look at the documents, which came out with the neocons at the turn of the century, they blueprint it up to 2020. So the great aim of securing this domination was over that 20 or 19-year span. So it's now past, now over that, and let's hope we can hope this great dream falls to pieces now. This dreadful, I think it's dreadful aspiration, a global empire, which is in many ways, from American point of view, is the purpose of 9/11. Okay, and for any Americans here, I'm sure we're well aware that the glorious American Constitution absolutely prohibits empire. Okay, very much the point of the American Constitution was to distribute powers, prevent it coming into one person who wants total power, and prevent having an empire. It was a reaction against Britain, which had an empire, and it was a blueprint of how America could live without having an empire. So this dream is absolute violation of the empire. Okay, I strongly recommend this Frenchman, Laurence Guyénot, who's written a lot about the Jewish religion, destiny of Israel, JFK, and 9/11. And unfortunately, this classic book of his is out of print. You probably can't get it. JFK, 9/11, 50 Years of the Deep State. And his conclusion is the passionate attachment between Israel and the US has been going on for decades, and 9/11 is one of its monstrous offsprings. 9/11 was made possible by an alliance between secret worshippers of Israel and corrupted American elements. Now that is so true. That's such a good summary. You've got the neocons in America and international Zionism, and they, in the closing years of the last century, they came together. Normally, through history, Jews have espoused left-wing politics. They've been radical, sort of subversive elements, pro-communist, pro-socialist. But in a somewhat abnormal twist, that they moved into a conservative movement, what calls itself a conservative movement in America, the neocons, through the time of the Bush's presidency, and they, as I mentioned, they blueprinted a lot of documents for a future of the world in which America was the only superpower. And the Brzezinski doctrine is very central here. Zbigniew Brzezinski formulated his book, The Great Chessboard, that America had to maintain its position as the only superpower, and other great powers must be broken up, and the resources of other nations were tributaries that had to flow towards America, and as he put it, the barbarians must not unite. So that Brzezinski doctrine was very much followed by those at the end of the last century, whereby America was the only superpower. What was that? Did that coincide with the desires of Israel? That is the kind of mystery that we need to fathom. Now, this is the view of Laurence Guyénot, who wrote the classic book linking 50 years of the deep state, JFK to 9/11, I'm sorry the book's out of print, but anyway, Blyther's kindly going to read out this section from it.
James Hepburn concluded in his 1968 book Farewell America with these words: President Kennedy's assassination was the work of magicians. It was a stage trick, complete with accessories and fake mirrors, and when the curtain fell, the actors and even the scenery disappeared. 9/11 was also a stage trick of magicians, the same company, I believe. Not only did they make New York's tallest skyscrapers vanish into a cloud of smoke with the magic word Osama bin Laden, they also made planes appear and then disappeared. Not just UA-93 swallowed by the Earth, or AA-77 vaporized into the Pentagon. I mean also UA-175, which supposedly crashed into the South Tower. Let's leave aside AA-11, whose single ghostly image was supernaturally captured by the twice Emmy-awarded Node brothers.
Thank you. Right. So this really is part of what I mean by the deep state, and we've looked at how the meaning of the deep state is very much to do with the continuity of government that Dick Cheney activated on the morning of 9/11. So the idea of hidden powers. I mean, David Icke's always talking about the hidden hand in this book, and it's just a reality we have to deal with in this century, that things aren't quite what they appear to be. What is manifest and told to us doesn't quite seem to be the way things are, and so we don't quite know who killed off the Kennedys. In the same way as it's hard to tell exactly who was involved in 9/11. It's a setup. We know it's a setup, and it's done so well that it's hard to deconstruct it. As Mike Ruppert expressed it, there is a compelling case that Israel acted as a partner with US intelligence and financial interests in seeing to it the attacks on 9/11 were carried out. Israel-connected experts formed a core group at the Project for a New American Century. So it was called an American Century, but in a sense it was done for Israeli interests, so that Israel can expand and doesn't have to have its constricted borders and the horrific, deranged idea that there once existed a greater Israel, which is completely fictional by biblical story, in 10th century BC. If you read your Bible, there's the idea of 10th century BC of some huge empire from the Nile to the Euphrates that actually belonged to Egypt. That was the Empire of Egypt, actually. So this fantasy that never existed is the basis for the dream of a greater Israel. The state of Israel as it's set up now didn't correspond to anything much in ancient Bible times. Okay. Christopher Bolin has suffered a lot from trying to find out who did it, and there's a lot of his essays up on online, and here's what we might call a slightly one-sided view from the Israeli point of view, which is enormously real, but I'm trying to describe how there were two different factions that somehow worked in tandem, American and Israeli, to make this whole thing happen. That they coincided, that's the mystery of the planning, and that's how everyone kept so quiet and nobody confesses at all. Right. It becomes quite obvious that 9/11 and the War on Terror are both products of Israeli military intelligence, and that the terror atrocity was carried out to kickstart the Zionist war agenda. Well, that's indeed what has happened. The whole war agenda was kick-started suddenly. The War on Terror is basically an Israeli stratagem developed in the 1970s to deceive the American public into thinking that Israel's enemies are America's enemies. That's a very good way of expressing what happened. Where does Britain stand in this? I don't think it was involved in perpetrating 9/11 at all. It was a massive British military presence around to do with the invasion of Afghanistan, and that military presence built up before the event. So I think it's a maritime presence. And obviously once it happened, Tony Blair totally powered up with Bush to launch the war on terror, didn't he? And Britain, many people don't remember, Britain gave the rationale for America invading Afghanistan. America kept saying, oh, Bin Laden did it, we're going to bomb you. And the Taliban responded saying, well, just give us some evidence that Bin Laden did it, and then we'll hand him over. But we can't do that until you give us some evidence. And America kept huffy and puffy and saying it was going to give the evidence, but it couldn't, because it didn't have any. And then Britain supplied, Tony Blair supplied, one of Britain's sort of mendacious intelligence documents saying, we have evidence that Bin Laden did it, you know. And it was that shameful British document, well, that just appeared days before the bombing began of one of the poorest countries on earth. So I would say that Britain's involvement was basically after the event, and which is right, kind of strange, but that's what I'd say. Okay. Okay, just to finish the quote, the terror attacks of 9/11 did not bring us the war. Rather, the Israeli war on terror project that brought us 9/11. So I suggest that's quite a profound way of putting things. And I also suggest that is there any politician you know, give them this book, that they can't complain it's too long to read, you know. It hasn't got all the details in it. This is, you know, teeming with all the memory of details of what happened, analysing all the twists and turns of the story. And this is the basic kind of reason why it happened, how it enabled the future wars, and why the different people, it was worth their while to come together for this transcendental supreme act of terror, this mock pretense that America had been invaded. You could say that every war America has been involved in involves a mock false flag terror event, starting with the Gulf of Maine. Is it around about 1898? Thank you. 1898. Thank you.
I lived in the Philippines.
Oh right. That was against Spain, wasn't it?
Yes.
Against Spain. Thank you.
An external Spanish mine and turned out to be an internal explosion.
Yeah, internal explosion, and all the American troops happened to be off the ship at the time.
No, quite a few were killed.
Quite a few were killed.
Instantly blamed on Spain.
Instantly blamed on Spain. Right.
Right.
And would you agree that all the wars Americans involved in involve some sort of fabricated event?
Pretty much about 1800.
Yeah. So let's hope Americans wake up to the fact that every time they've been told some new war is going to happen, they're given a fake narrative, because nobody wants war with America, nobody at all. So America always needs a fake narrative, and this was the ultimate supreme fake narrative at the start of this new millennium. Okay, now one way of telling who was perpetrating the event is to answer the question, who knew exactly when it was going to happen? Now, intelligence agencies around the world were warning America that something was big was going down that autumn. Generally, I think congressmen or US senators were warned a week before to avoid air travel. I don't know if anyone's got any more detail about that, but I think they were given a general warning. One or two might have been told on the day, but generally speaking, it's something in the nature of told the week before, don't fly. Okay. Now, Adigo, the text messaging firm just around the corner from the World Trade Center, sent out a message to all Israeli nationals who were working in the towers that they should stay clear of the towers that day, and that was and they were within minutes of when the event was going to happen, the prediction. So it gave up to 2-hour advance warning, and for that reason, no Israeli nationals died as the towers crumbled. I think there might have been one who was just visiting, who didn't normally work there, and therefore didn't get the message. But that is regarded.
Messages have been given out.
Sorry?
Where would those messages have been given?
Who
would that be given?
Well, a text messaging firm has people on a list. So they were simply sent it out to their list of Israeli nationals. They publicly admitted it, and they said they were told from their main centre, which was in Israel, a place called Herzliya, which is the town just north of Tel Aviv, where Mossad is headquartered. So their main centre got the message from the town where Mossad is headquartered. Okay. Yeah. Also, there's a huge shipping firm, Zim, Israel Navigation Company, which moved out just 1 week before it was in the towers, and it paid a huge fine for breaking the rent contract in order to move out then 1 week before. So I think things like that are pretty clear. That shows absolutely firm knowledge, doesn't it? It's a bit like the precognition you get with the London bombing event.
There was a fellow as well called John O'Neill, wasn't there?
Yeah.
Nick, was there any explanation given how they were given warning about the build or not to go in that day? The Israeli citizens.
They just said they got the message from their central Odigo company in Israel. I think that's what he said. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. It's very important. General Wesley Clark. We mentioned the 7 nations to be destroyed. Soon after the 9/11 attacks, he was informed. He was shocked. About a month later, he went into somebody's office in the Pentagon, chatting with somebody he knew there. He was informed a secret military plan had come into being under which America would attack and destroy 7 major Muslim countries over the next few years, including Iraq, Iran, Syria and Libya, which coincidentally were all of Israel's strongest regional adversaries and leading supporters of the Palestinians. That is quoting from Ron Unz. So Ron Unz is a very sensible, conservative author and sort of philosopher, and his view is that it's not credible that Rumsfeld and Cheney would organise an event like this or would want an event like this to happen, whereas it is credible that Israel would want that. And I think it's very important that in this year a mainstream author and philosopher like that reaches such a conclusion. I suggest to you that's, on this 20th anniversary, that's a very significant move. And perhaps I could just add that 10 years our old 9/11 Truth Group existed, that would never ever be accepted. It was always 9/11 is our job, and anyone suggesting otherwise was an anti-Semite, He didn't want any of that. We didn't want that. Oh, no. So things have changed a lot now. And this quote from Ron Unz is, I think, a major step. And I'll just show how, from a quote in the book of Deuteronomy, 7 nations greater and mightier than yourselves, you must utterly destroy them. You shall make no covenant with them.
Well, they weren't greater and mightier.
So?
They were not greater or mightier than the US. Oh, is that
I'm talking about the quote from the book of Deuteronomy. This is where the notion of 7 evil nations to be destroyed comes from. Okay?
But they were weaker.
Well, this is just the Bible quote, okay?
I know, but I'm just pointing out it doesn't quite correlate.
But the 7 nations, in other words, being a good Zionist, I think we're surrounded by these powerful enemies, so we have to defend ourselves.
So where did this come from? Wesley Clark asked where it came from, and all he was told, it came from the office of Donald Rumsfeld. Now, how did he get a list of 7 nations? We're not told that. This is where we lack an inquiry that would enable us to answer the important questions. Someone gave a list of nations to Donald Rumsfeld, and he said, "Yes, sir. Okay, of course, yeah, 7 nations, yeah." And that just became American policy. So General Wesley Clark, its absolute top general, was flabbergasted to find that this has simply become Pentagon military policy. And it wasn't to be discussed, There wasn't a big military discussion of it, it was just policy. Yes?
I just want to say, in fact, last week somebody sent me a television interview with General Clark, who's now retired. And he went through this whole story.
Oh yeah.
About how he was shot and so on, and he discussed it.
Right.
What I'm talking about, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, but this is fairly recent. He's now retired.
Right, but retired, yeah.
TV presentation.
Yeah. Thank you. Right. Okay. Here is another top military man, Alan Zabrowski, I mentioned earlier. He would teach the American military war college, and he came out with absolutely definite conclusion. This is in 2009. Okay, he said, "I've had long conversations over the last 2 weeks with contacts at the Army War College and the headquarters, Marine Corps, and I've made it absolutely clear in both cases that it is 100% certain that 9/11 was a Mossad operation, period. The Zionists are playing this as an all-or-nothing exercise. If they lose this one, they're done." Right, so that's the very highest level, and as you can imagine, he's been banned and censored very severely since then. He gave a Press TV interview, and immediately after that, Press TV was banned from the West. Pressure from the Anti-Defamation League, and the video archive was deleted, including the Zabrowski interview. So, the powers that be have got the clout to try and stop this. Interview with Kevin Barrett, he reckons a story where Zabrowski was so hated by the Zionists that the mention of his name can get you arrested. So I don't know about that.
What's the ADL standing for?
The ADL, Anti-Defamation League. I think that's about the most powerful pressure group in America, isn't it? Right. And that echoes what an Italian ex-president has said a couple of years earlier, right? Former the president of Italy, Francesco Cossiga, he said, "All the intelligence services of America and Europe know well that the disastrous attack has been planned and realised from the Mossad, with the aid of the Zionist world, in order to put under accusation the Arabic countries and in order to introduce the Western powers to take part in Iraq and Afghanistan." So once politicians have retired, it's kind of safe for them to make statements like this, or obviously they'll only say things like this once they're retired. Okay. Okay. Now, I think this is, by way of conclusion, I think this is a very sane, sensible balance that Alan Zabrowski is here describing. This marriage made in hell between America and Israel. That it's a whole sort of theological dimension to this, which let's not go into. But I'll just read out what he says. "Given the pervasiveness of Zionist influence in US government and its intelligence and security agencies, two broad scenarios are possible. One is that the neocons and their cohorts were in the driver's seat with Israel in the passenger seat with a map and the baggage. The second sees Israel driving with the neocons and others handling the map and the baggage. But they were both in the same cart on the road to and from 9/11. Both were embedded in aspects of the planning and execution of the catastrophe, the wars it spawned, linking treason and treachery in tandem, no matter where the emphasis is placed." Now, I think that's a terrific statement, and let's hope the American military put this up on the wall and read it every day. It's a situation that won't go away. It's the betrayal of America, betrayal of everything that America thought it stood for, by a treacherous trick. And so now there are top military advisors and sages in America come out and saying this. Right, so Zabrowski advised America, you've got a choice. He said, choose carefully and well. This is like his message to America of where you want to go. Where does America want to go? Where we go depends on what kind of legacy we wish to leave to our grandchildren and posterity. The US can be a protector, enabler and ally, a first and last resort to an Israel few would support if they truly knew what it was, and did, spending our lives and treasure in support of its ambitions. Or the American people can realise that they have been misled and betrayed from within and without, take back their government and treat Israel as the rogue it is, a criminal state we have fostered. Right, thank you. Well,